Addiction to prescription painkiller drugs.
More than 100,000 died from the drug during the pandemic alone.
It's brought death and misery to millions of Americans.
Of fatal fentanyl overdoses.
Fueling a national opioid crisis.
We call it the new epidemic.
But the leading producers of these drugs are no longer pharmaceutical companies. They are Mexican cartels and criminals.
Imagínese 100,000 pastillas, mandan millones de pastillas hacia Estados Unidos.
When you have synthetically produced drugs, this is a complete game changer.
So, what has driven this shift to illegal production and consumption of synthetic drugs?
This resembles more like the gig economy.
And what does this diversification of revenue streams say about the future of the notorious Mexican cartels?
And the huge advantage for these groups is also you don't have to provide anything but violence on a local level.
A remote corner of the rural Mexican state of Sinaloa. These two men are illegally cooking fentanyl. Fentanyl is an opioid drug consumed by millions north of the border in America.
Se echa el fentanilo bloqueado en una vasija, se le echa alcohol, el propileno y ya se calienta a una temperatura indicada, ya se hace un reposo de 7 a 8 horas, se seca y ya se empaca.
Fentanyl is not difficult to cook if you know the recipe. One reason why business is booming for producers.
Sí, pues nosotros el año pasado vendíamos 5 o 6 kilos por mes. Ahorita vendemos 10 a 12 por mes. Cada año va aumentando, la gente quiere más. Va dobleteando. Sí, va dobleteando la producción.
This boom in illegal production of fentanyl has been driven by rising demand in both Mexico and America. Fentanyl has been legally prescribed and distributed in America since the 1960s as an anesthetic.
It's time now for surgery of this veteran.
But the recent spike in illegal production and consumption marks a new chapter in the country's opioid crisis. Opioid addiction has affected millions of Americans for over 2 decades, and some analysts say the crisis has now entered a third phase.
The first phase was prescription drugs, was OxyContin. That created a very large population of dependent users, 3-4 million dependent users. When the DEA and the US government realized what was happening with prescription drugs, and they started putting the screws on physicians, this demand shifted to heroin. The illegal actors that work in this market realized that fentanyl provides a much better value to volume ratio than heroin.
In the US, Customs seized 5 tons of fentanyl in 2021, more than double the amount during the previous year. Although the volumes seized may seem relatively small, one attraction of fentanyl for criminals is that a little goes a very long way compared to natural opioids such as heroin.
For every 50 tons of heroin, you need to smuggle 1 ton of fentanyl because of potency.
Production and trafficking of fentanyl are now growing revenue streams for Mexican cartels and criminals.
In Mexico, you've traditionally had production of heroin and marijuana, and you've had trafficking of cocaine from Colombia.
The Mexican cartels have diversified their criminal portfolio in the drug world by focusing increasingly on synthetic drugs.
Heroin and cocaine require farms and manpower. Much like legitimate businesses, cartels and criminals are attracted by opportunities to reduce overhead costs. It's estimated that fentanyl can be produced at 1/100th of the cost of heroin. The precursor chemicals required to make fentanyl are relatively cheap.
You can be a whole bunch of precursors, it might just be a few $1,000s, and you're producing millions of dollars worth of drugs. So the profit margins there are huge.
Although there is often talk of fentanyl labs. The reality is production is low-tech, with no need for expensive equipment nor training. A readily mobile lab like this can make a kilo of fentanyl in a day with just 2 people.
When you have synthetically produced drugs, this is a complete game changer. These labs can be anywhere. You're not depending on being close to the crops.
You need some knowledge of basic chemistry and disregard for human life. That's basically what you need to produce large amounts of fentanyl. You don't need a large industrial facility.
The market forces of globalization mean the supply chains for illegal synthetic drugs production mirror those of millions of legitimate goods. In today's global marketplace, legitimate industrial manufacturers often look to China to supply materials and chemicals. And it's no different in the case of the precursors needed for fentanyl cooking. Producers exploit the huge volume of legal global trade to smuggle in these chemicals.
You have huge ports in Mexico, including the port of Manzanillo, Colima, the port of Lázaro Cárdenas, the port of Veracruz. First, you have a lot of corruption in the authorities in the ports, but also it can be quite hard to know what they're looking for. Sometimes you say, okay, what are the precursors for fentanyl? And you look it up, and these are like A47632-1B. It's like, how do these people know and keep up with what they're looking for to bust it?
China has been much more effective in controlling manufactured fentanyl over the past 2, 3, 4, 5 years, but less so in controlling access to precursors. So what you're seeing is that something of a nearshoring process where fentanyl production is coming from China to Mexico.
For those cooking fentanyl, the risks to personal health are high.
¿Qué tan peligroso es hacer fentanil? La verdad es muy peligroso incluso hasta para nosotros. Hemos tenido ahí compañeros que se han intoxicado. Le hemos tenido que llevar al hospital de emergencia porque mucho vómito, diarrea, mareos.
Cooks have been said to die from the inhalation and exposure to the chemicals. Just as in the legal business world, workers are prepared to stomach risks in return for the promise of high rewards. The average daily salary in Mexico is just over $23 a day. But these cooks say they make 4 times that, around $100 a day.
Sí, pues sí le da miedo a uno, pero pues tiene que trabajar y llevar dinero para la casa. Es que con lo que ganaría en el campo, otro trabajo en Culiacán normal, no podría mantener a la familia.
Like some well-established, legitimate businesses built on particular revenue streams, the notorious Mexican cartels have successfully adapted their business models in response to traditional revenue streams declining. Synthetic drugs are helping to make up for a drop in income from marijuana. The legalization of marijuana in 18 US states has cost the cartels billions in revenues. From 2015 to 2019, marijuana seizures by the US authorities decreased significantly, reflecting a decline in black market production in Mexico. In 2021, for the first time, seizures of synthetic drugs were larger than cocaine and heroin seizures.
Se hacía China One y heroína negra y blanca. Nosotros nos convertimos ya porque se bajó la demanda en la China One y en la chiva, en la heroína negra y blanca. Se bajó la demanda en ellas y tuvimos que aprender a hacer fentanilo. Fue lo que estaba pidiendo el mercado. Porque la gente, como el fentanilo es más adictivo, lo que más consume la gente ahorita. Los consumidores les gustó más, como la dosis es más fuerte, pues.
In today's globalized world, the changing preferences of consumers in rich countries often dictate which products are manufactured in the developing world. The supply chain of synthetic drugs from China and Mexico is fueled by the rising demand in America. Back in Sinaloa, this producer says turning fentanyl into pills provides the best bang for buck, requiring less manpower for mass production.
lleva más concentraciones y se hace mucho más volumen. Y en la pastilla sí se trabaja más que el fentanilo puro. Se echa la máquina con el punzón que debe traer la máquina y ya la máquina solo hace su trabajo, uno no mete las manos, más que ir sacándolas.
Pills are appealing to traffickers because they can be easily distributed, either by direct orders on the dark net or by smuggling over the border to the US.
Imagínese 100,000 pastillas, mandan millones de pastillas hacia Estados Unidos, en carros, trailers, en el tren, en el cuerpo de personas, sí, pero por dentro, y a veces se las ponen aquí pegadas al cuerpo, pero pues más en mujeres, las personas más en mujeres que se las meten por ahí por sus partes.
Good branding and marketing tends to pay off for businesses, and synthetic drugs producers have proved adept at these too. Turning fentanyl into pills has broadened its appeal to consumers in America. They can be packaged as relief prescription pills, which appear similar to the painkillers sold by legal pharmaceutical companies during the first phase of the opioid crisis. And they're more palatable to middle-class Americans than heroin.
The opioid crisis in the United States also changed the nature of the Mexican drug trade because less and less people used heroin, particularly injected themselves with heroin, which was regarded as the junkie drug and therefore dirty and socially unacceptable. This, in no small part, fed the increase in the use of pills.
It's not only innovative sales techniques where the synthetic drugs business mirrors trends in the legitimate business world. The business model of Mexican drug cartels has been compared by analysts to large franchises like Walmart. But in recent times, once large cartels have fragmented and splintered. Production of synthetic drugs has come to rely less on affiliated members of established cartels and more on freelance subcontractors. The global gig economy has reached the black market.
Pues nosotros somos un grupo independiente que le vendemos a quien nos compre, pues.
This resembles more like the gig economy than what we imagined as a large-scale criminal syndicate as portrayed in narco series in Netflix or whatever.
We're really looking at our universes of production, of membership and of belonging, as it were, and of participation in these markets that are highly decentralized and are being fed by a plethora of semi-independent, semi-autonomous participants. As such, it's a highly decentralized, highly resilient business and organizational model. The production of fentanyl has, in many ways, democratized the drug market.
This democratization of the narcotics market is changing the structure of criminal groups in Mexico and breaking up some of the traditionally powerful franchises. Where there were once 8 large criminal conglomerates, only 2 remain recognizably in this form. But there are now an estimated 200 smaller active non-state armed illegal groups. These smaller groups are leaner and more flexible. Many have diversified their criminal activities in search of easier profits.
Smaller gangs probably don't have the wherewithal for large-scale drug trafficking, but they will have the wherewithal for extortion, theft, kidnapping, for more predatory activities. Their income stream is probably more diversified than what you had, say, 25 years ago.
From kidnapping for ransom and human trafficking to fuel theft and extortion of avocado farmers, this trend towards diversification looks likely to continue.
If you look at industries like the avocado industry, those are billion-dollar markets. And the huge advantage for these groups is also you don't have to provide anything but violence on a local level. It's a hydra-headed business model that brings in huge numbers in a very fragmented, decentralized fashion. Mexican criminal groups have really become multi-commodity entrepreneurs over the past decade and a half.
Organised crime, drug traffickers in Mexico have adapted, made a huge amounts of money, and their networks have become these monsters that have helped destabilise this country.
Hello, I'm Tom Standage, Deputy Editor at The Economist. If you'd like to learn more about this topic, click on the link opposite. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.